It's changed quite a bit. So a few years ago when we started our impact investing initiative, we were the only university that said, let's put a lens on what's going on in the field of impact investing and try to study it and bring it forward. We were very excited then about using the power of a mainstream business institution to, both ask and answer interesting questions, but also to engage the more mainstream faculty and constituents of business schools and business education in the idea of what investing for impact could be. And of course, 4 years later, the terrain has completely changed, that many, or if not all, of the major business schools in the U.S. and starting around the world are starting to build initiatives around the idea of impact in finance. And of course, that's being driven by what's happening outside of academic institutions, where major banks and pension funds and other institutions are joining the kind of pioneer, smaller boutique institutions have been doing this for a very long time. So I think it's a microcosm. I think it's a reflection of the changing growth and attention in the marketplace. And it's especially driven within business schools by the demand by millennials, who are one of the segments of the population that is most interested in investing for impact. I would say maybe 5 years ago, people came in with this kind of generic sense of, I want to do good, and social enterprise sounds good to me, so let me try that. And now we see people coming in with much more focused objectives. I am coming here to do this MBA so that I can start this venture that's going to do X for Y population, and I need A, B, and C to get it done. And we are a path on that trajectory, which is really exciting. And then generally, I would say that some of the kind of fundamental ways that we are collectively learning to work together, this generation is kind of naturally good at through technology and other things, which is, how do you engage with others? How do you kind of continually adapt and learn? How do you test things really fast without getting too attached to them? How do you figure out how to engage constituents early on so that it's not a top-down, but a more bottoms-up, right? There's a whole bunch of very practical things that we've learned really work when you're trying to make social change that millennials are suited to. Oh, that's a great question. Many more things than I can possibly answer, and many more things than many of us can answer, but perhaps together we can start to do some really good collaborations. I feel like we are probably at maybe the 5% point if the scheme of understanding impact investing very clearly enough to make better choices about it is a 100% continuum. I think we're at the 5% point. And I think the reason for that is I feel like we are trying to simultaneously understand a bunch of different things. We're trying to understand what is the financial return profile of different kinds of investments, right? So for the first time, we have 2 major studies this year that were done around investments aiming towards market rate using private equity. That is just one slice of the set of asset classes and other tools that people are using, but we're starting to get some answers about that. I feel like there's another set of questions around how much impact are these enterprises or investments actually having, and what can we learn about the risk and potential and actual return on the impact side of these investments. I feel like we're almost like 1% of the way on that. We've had some really good initiatives from B-Lab and IRIS to others, to some really incredible work that's being done in the social impact bond space around outcome and outcome performance. We just have a lot more ground to plow there, and it's really early days. And then I think we have another set of questions that I'm particularly interested in as a student of social entrepreneurship, which is, what have we learned, or what are we learning about how good ideas become social enterprises, but then how those social enterprises actually grow their impact to actually tip a system, or to actually have impact at a scale that matters. And we're now 25 years in to some of the kind of original conceptors of the idea of social enterprise. Teach for America, microfinance was much longer because it had a longer learning curve, about 30 years that it took for Grameen Bank to become profitable and sustainable. But we do not have a lot of those models for the next phase of, I'm in 5 countries or I'm in 7 countries. I, have a model that I can show actually has impact on the population that I'm trying to reach, but how do I get it to be the norm? How do I get it to actually challenge the status quo? How do I encourage governments to work with me or replicate what I'm doing or respect what I'm doing and support it? How do I engage corporations? There's a great new report that Acumen Fund just put out on, what's the intersection between impact enterprises and corporations, and how do we create positive relationships between those two things? That report is great because it's all about the positive. I've heard a lot of negatives in the field as well, where the motivations are not totally clear around those two parties, and there are quite a few risks to the smaller enterprises if they don't understand the facilitation necessary to get that to happen. So I feel like the piece of the field that's still unwritten is, if you do get to the point where you have a very successful and sustainable enterprise, how does that translate into a new status quo in whatever field that you're working in? And I feel like what we need to do is actually, if someone said, what could you do with, $5 million to study social enterprise? That's what I would do, is I would actually create a large collaborative panel set to look at what are the successful models and what are the failure models, and can we define some paths for people that are based on experience, and help entrepreneurs see those decision trees. We run an accelerator as part of our program at Duke. It's called the Social Entrepreneurship Accelerator at Duke. We're working with mid-stage global health enterprises in East Africa and India. Those paths are completely not clear to them. There is one clear path, which is you become investable by some sort of equity investor and you go up the chain and either get acquired or IPO. That's a very clear path. That is completely not appropriate for most of the social ventures that we work with, who are in low-income markets and may not ever be acquirable at that rate. But those other paths are unclear, and I would love to study that, which would probably require some differentiation according to geography and impact area or industry, but would be fun. I personally think the Achilles heel of impact investing is impact measurement, because I feel like there is no floor right now for what someone must be or do to call themselves an impact investor or an impact investment. So it's very easy for someone to say, yeah, I'm an impact investment because I create jobs, or because I do something, and that it's all very mushy. So I feel like that mushy boundary on the bottom threshold of what we're even talking about is an Achilles heel for the field, because it can be used by people with different motives, and one really bad press story about that could turn us around. I feel like on the other side, I feel like we need layers in between that and the idea of certifying and recognizing really, really good practice. And what I feel is we have a gap between those two things. We have no floor, and we have a very hard to get to ceiling, and we're not appreciating the difficulty and giving credit for people who are moving up that chain in terms of providing better and better evidence as they progress. So it's something that I'm really interested in trying to fix. It's a really good question. So I feel like our knowledge and practice of impact assessment it's at such a low level for a bunch of reasons. One reason is because we are not clear about what the stakeholders that we're dealing with, what they need in terms of impact assessment. There's actually a spectrum of needs, and everyone kind of bunches it all together and says, that's too expensive, I won't do it, or the government funder says, I need a random control trial, and the poor entrepreneur who's 2 years old is saying, why would I do a random control trial when I don't even know what my model is yet, right? So we just have a whole bunch of, we have a lack of clarity on what the purpose of impact assessment actually is, and what is reasonable for that stakeholder to ask, given the stage of development of an enterprise. So that's one. We're trying to fix that through some things we're doing. Second, I would say, is because it's actually just really hard, right? So that different levels of evidence require different levels of investment, and to know, and so what most people in the impact investing world do is they do shortcuts. So we're getting better at shortcuts, right? So one shortcut is, well, I'm just gonna basically think about my theory of change, and I'm gonna decide what are the most important indicators that I could define that are part of my business that will give me a sense that I'm that I'm moving along that chain and getting to what I want. So there's much more common practice now than there was even 5 years ago around this idea of key performance indicators, or basically output measures. And we have IRIS, so you can align your key performance indicators with standards. You can benchmark them against other people. You can track them yourselves. You can track them against others like you and kind of compare yourself to proxies. That's all actually really rich stuff, and if it's done really well, can be very, very useful. It does not. Again, it suffices for some people in the market. It does not at all suffice for a large government funder or a large philanthropic funder who has to prove that you're actually having an outcome, beyond what would have happened anyway. And so, I feel like differentiating our different purposes is important. I think the other thing is that within different domains, we need to start building up reference points. Right, so it's one thing to say, I want you to, develop some key performance indicators in education, and then every education, venture tracks different things, and that becomes, the uniqueness factor is very important for going in depth and understanding the impact of something, but it makes it very hard to draw comparisons and to see what's working across a field.